Hello and welcome to Transition Tea, the podcast dedicated to demystifying the world of healthcare, transition and activation planning. I'm your host, Kelly Guzman, the president and CEO of Yellow Brick Consulting. And today I am honored and super excited to have Erica Dickey joining us. So Erica, welcome to our podcast. And can you please provide our listeners with a background about you?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. I'm super excited to be here. So, I have known Kelly my entire life. Um, since the moment I was born, she is my aunt and godmother. And so, from that moment, I think I was always destined for healthcare. My mom is also a nurse. And so, I grew up surrounded by all these amazing nurses. Um, and that kind of fed my career trajectory. Initially, when I decided to go to college, I'm like, hey, let me branch out and see what else is out there. And I got my first degree in environmental studies from UC Santa Barbara, but then immediately went back to my family and started working as a transition planner and in the healthcare field. And through those experiences, that kind of like sparked my interest in nursing and really helped me realize what my true passions were. Went back to nursing school, and fast forward 5 years later, here I am as a clinical practice education specialist at City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center in Duarte, which I'm absolutely in love with the role. And my educational background as of now is I'm a board certified clinical nurse specialist with a specialty in hematology and hematopoietic stem cell transplantation and CAR T cell therapy. So, quite the journey. But I'm really excited to be here and talk about transition and project management and the CNS role and how it all kind of like comes together in this like perfect trifecta of wonderfulness. So,
Well, thank you for that. Lots of words that I don't know if a lot of our listeners can pronounce and remember, but definitely lots of education, lots of study. So cheers to you. So today we are going to be drinking apple cider tea, which I took a sneak peek and it is delicious. It's got a little bit of blackberry and vanilla. So listeners, please grab a cup and join us as we drink our tea and have a chat. So you talked about your trajectory into your role. So can you tell us about your current role, what you do every day?
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'm sure a lot of people have questions about like what a CNS is, like a clinical nurse specialist, because I certainly didn't know about that until after I graduated nursing school and met one and said like, hey, you might be good for this role. So what's cool about being a clinical nurse specialist, it's kind of like where frontline nursing and research and project management meet. And so in my current role, what I'm responsible for is I do a fair amount of education for new graduate nurses and experienced nurses who are transitioning into the specialty. But I also do a lot of like evidence-based practice, which is like research light. And so part of my job is to delve into the literature and understand what are the best practices surrounding different concepts in nursing, like preventing central line infections or how to manage pain, things like that. And then I get those concepts and I create a initiative around them and implement change. So that's where the project management comes in. And so I kind of help to translate that academic theory and research into actual bedside practice, which is really exciting. So making that literature and all those those like really fancy academic papers into something that we could actually use. So I spend a lot of my time doing like project management, like initiatives throughout the service line. um, and then I also help to generate some new evidence-based practice content as well. So I find that very exciting. So I really feel like in a way, like if anyone were ever to be like groomed and bred, like and born for a role, like this was it for me, because I still get to do patient care. I still see patients every day, whether it's just like helping with the procedure or helping somebody assess like somebody for a complication, um, or helping with a clinical trial. But I also get to do project management, implementing all these changes throughout the organization, and then I get to do like a little tiny bit of research, but just enough where it's not too like bogged down, and I get to solve different problems every single day. No day is the same, so that's kind of what I get to do every single day, and I absolutely love it.
Sounds super exciting and appealing to me because, as you know, I get bored very easily, and so that's really why I, transitioned into the role of transition, because even though we're doing project management and stuff, it's something new every day. So I think that's the cool thing about being a CNS. There's always new research, always new things that you get to implement and use your project management skills. So speaking of that, can you share with the listeners how you became a project manager? So you did start when you were very young in project support, and then as a coordinator, and then as a project manager. So can you share that journey and then the skills that you use to be a project manager?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I started with the consulting firm when I was 19 as project support, which meant like more of like an administrative support role. So helping to edit documents and put together folders and things like that. Um, and then, you know, progressively over the years, working my way up the ladder to become a project coordinator, which is assisting the project manager with various aspects of the project. So, taking notes during meetings, helping to prepare things for various elements of, like along the project trajectory, which was actually, I think, probably the moment where I learned the most, because my job at that point in time was just to like sit back and listen and to absorb and figure and to learn how to anticipate like the needs of my project manager and the needs of the client. And so I think being in that role for so long helped me kind of understand like how to put the pieces together. And I really feel like that's where I understood like the fundamentals of project management. And then later on, I think about like 8 or 9 years later, I earned my project management certification and became a project manager. Um, so yeah, it definitely was quite the journey, and I think what I loved the most about it was that opportunity to travel to different places and see how different healthcare is throughout the country. I got to go to projects in Texas and Georgia and Alaska, and I even got to go to a project in Vancouver. And as the project coordinator, sitting in those meetings, listening to those leaders, learning about different communication styles, different organizational cultures, different ways to implement change, like that was so key to what I do now and learning how to be flexible. Um and what I love too about that experience is like we never really did the same thing twice. Like you have the project management framework that you generally follow, but you learn how to be flexible and adapt it to whatever situation that you're in and what the client really needs. So I feel like that was a really wonderful experience. And then becoming a project manager and be able to start owning some of those pieces, um, was like I think it really helped to mold my leadership skills, and it really was very challenging. But I appreciate all of those experiences because now that's what I do full time. So I think it really helped me as a nurse when I became a nurse after being a project manager or being in project management for so long, because it helped me learn just that flexibility and ability to communicate and things like that. So yeah.
So you you talk about flexibility and change, and clearly you are very smart and very educated and have a lot of experience. And I know when we come into the project, we work with, as you mentioned, people across the country. So they have a different idea of what we're doing. What advice would you give to either the transition team or the consultants who come in who know what the work is that needs to be done, but the end user or the client isn't ready to receive it? So we know they need to do new workflow. We know that they need to have an education plan, but they want to do it a different way, or they have like a better idea, air quotes, a better idea of how to do it. So, if you're bringing in an expert to do something, what kind of processes or skills have you seen like your transition leaders use to help, kind of push change that maybe the organization might not want?
That is a great question. I think the very first step is like you need to sit back and listen. You need to come in with an open mind. You can't come in guns blazing because they don't know you. You need to really work hard to develop a rapport and even like a little bit of a personal relationship with the people that you're working with so that you can foster trust. And it's even true now, just like working across different units and different specialties at my hospital. But if you can't come you can't approach it with this attitude of like everything. And so what I like to do, or what I would recommend, is really delving into, if you feel that resistance, like trying to understand where is that
Mm-hmm.
coming from. And if somebody's saying, well, I don't want to do it this way, I think it'd be better if we did it this way, it's like, okay, help me understand. What is your vision? What do you think might be the potential barriers of doing it the way that I recommended, or why do you think this would be better? And then maybe they're right. And then you just learned something new. You just learned a different way to do something, like, okay, great, let's try that. Or maybe you can help them see it in a different way that doesn't feel so like forced upon them, and you can kind of go through that thought process together. So approaching it with that open mind, I think, is your best course of action, and kind of going on like a little bit of like a listening tour, getting people comfortable with you, understanding what the pain points are in the organization, getting to know the organizational culture, how has change happened in the past, what was successful, what wasn't, so that you can adapt your style and the way that you present things, would be helpful as well.
I love that flexibility and definitely listening, communication skills. So all of those things we need to do from a transition perspective. So we do planning as we do meet the client, and then we look at the various pieces of our activation with the fit up planning, with the workflow, with the education. We do the dress rehearsals. All leading up to either a move of patients or a move of people, or if it's a brand new greenfield, just day one activation where we say go. So what's your favorite part of that transition process?
When we actually get to implement things. And that's the way that I feel now. Like, I understand that, like, the planning stage and discovery at the beginning, when you're putting all the pieces together and understanding like the logistics that are required in order to implement, like, that is super important. But I also feel a lot of times it's tedious, and sometimes it could be a little discouraging, because the objectives one of the objectives during that time period is understanding like your barriers and the things that could potentially be risks and get in your way. um and it can take a really long time to get through that planning stage, but once you do and you actually get to implement, like, that's when the magic happens. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, yes, like, we're working on a couple of projects at work right now where we've been planning the implementation for like 4 months. And just getting all the right approvals, putting all the pieces together, getting the products in place. Where are we going to store it? Who's going to be responsible for that? But once, like, in the next month or so, we're actually going to get to implement and seeing the results of all of our hard work, and like the actual impact on patient care and nursing. Is That's what I get most excited about. And then I feel like it's like this beautiful period of like hopefully seeing what you want to see. But even if like it falls flat, or if it's like not successful, you still learn something. Like, so that's
Mhm.
also valuable too. Like one of my professors in undergrad always said, like, no data is still data. Like, so it's like, okay, cool. So it's still publishable to say like, okay, we tried all of these things and it failed. But most of the time that's not the case, hopefully. And you get to see like the fruits of your labor, and then the hard work starts again in maintaining and sustaining the change. But that's what I love. I love seeing the magic
Action.
happen. And it's kind of like
Definitely.
move day or like day in the life, right? It's like having a baby sometimes. Like you're working for years to get to this point, or like for day in the life or dress rehearsal when you're designing all of the different scenarios, and you have all these meetings and it feels so tedious putting all of these different elements together, and then the day that you actually get to do it and you see all the pieces come together, that's cool. That can be like a really cool thing. And then you find out, like, you kind of like prove it to other people, like all that hard work was totally worth it because you achieved something, you learned something together. And so I like that.
I love that. Yeah, that's definitely my favorite part too, is watching it actually happen, and the things that you thought were going to happen, you're like, oh wow, it's working. It's working the way we thought it was going to work. And it's always amazing to me on move day where you have this big facility with nobody in it, and you go through the day before, and I always walk the day before and think, wow, tomorrow it's going to be completely different. And then you come back at the end of the move, and it seems like people have been there forever. So it is magical. So you talked about data and publishing, and you are a published author. So you've published articles, academic articles, and then you've been chapter contributor for the two books that we've published with Yellow Brick. So any advice? I guess two questions. One is like, how do you approach the writing process, and then do you have any advice for people who are wanting to publish?
I think I have the same answer for both questions,
Okay.
is you just do it. Just get started. And it sounds a lot more intimidating than it ends up being, and I think it's like one of those things where it's like you just have to just get it over with, do it once, submit, and then you'll find like, okay, this isn't as complicated as I thought it was going to be. And that's part of my job too, is helping frontline nurses and my colleagues and other staff members publish and share the things that we have learned so that we can contribute to the greater body of knowledge and other cancer centers and cancer programs out there, and they could learn from us and we can learn from them. But what I always tell people is like, it's if you've executed this project and you put so much work into it and you see this difference and it's making a huge impact on patient care or making a huge impact on healthcare, you need to share it. That is one of the most noble things that you can do as like a scientist and a human being, is sharing knowledge that could help people. And that's what we want to do as nurses fundamentally. I mean, like, even starting in nursing school, when you learn something, you need to teach your patient. Education is a huge part of what we do, and sharing knowledge is a huge part of what we do. And so once you get to that point where you're starting to create knowledge, you need to disseminate. And that also is like the last piece, the last step in the evidence-based practice process, is dissemination. So just do it. Put pen to paper if that's how you feel, or just like write out what you think it should look like, and then find a mentor, I guess, would be my other part of it. Find somebody who's done it before and it can help guide you through that process, because like learning what you need to include in your article depending on like what journal it would fit best, um, and like how to put the data together, how to put your figures together, things like that can be a little bit more challenging to navigate. So identifying somebody who has done it before and can kind of help you put together those pieces is also really helpful. And so I'm within your organization, within your consulting firm, I'm sure there's somebody who has done that. But if you can't find anybody, you can always go on professional forums, through like, I don't like the PMI, the Project Management Institute, or for us, it's the Oncology Nursing Society, and just ask and put it out there and say, hey, I'm interested in publishing data that I did for this project, or my latest evidence-based practice initiative. Is there anybody out there who can help me, or like what is your advice? And so many people are willing to help because they feel like it's important too. And so finding that community is also really helpful.
I love that, and I can hear your passion in your voice of educating the world, one person and one patient at a time. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
So just going down a different path, you've taken lots of classes and had to learn lots of different skills. Was there anything that you had to learn that you just dreaded, either going to class every day or just looking at the title of the class and saying, why in the world or how in the world am I going to get through this, that has proven to be invaluable, or something that you use and you're like, wow, I never thought I was going to use this, that is just helpful in your career?
I really had to think about this because honestly, like with my graduate school, I always felt like there's something that I could like tease out from those classes, like even stats. Like I use stats all the time because I have to interpret data and things like that. But then I really reflected and I'm like, you know what was like my Achilles heel and like almost took me down in college was chemistry. So organic chemistry, analytical chemistry, or like all of the chemistries that I had to take for my undergraduate degree, was every day I dreaded going to class. And it just was the most challenging thing. And I think I ended up taking most of those classes twice, because I couldn't get it the first time, but I was just like determined to master it. And I'm really happy that I did put in the effort to do that, because now that I work at a cancer center that does a lot of clinical trials and uses a lot of different like immunotherapies and investigational drugs and things like that. Like I think it really helps me understand a little bit more about how those drugs work in the human body, and how they interact with different things like normal saline and dextrose and the things that we mix them with, which is important also from like an educator perspective, so I can empower my nurses and say like, hey, don't mix this with this because it might precipitate, or like a bad chemical reaction might happen. And so I never realized how much I would need it or use it, and I'm really happy that I did put in the effort. But yeah, that was definitely surprising because, like, I mean, like in high school, I think that everyone's like, okay, you have to take chemistry, but like, when will I ever use this, right? Like geometry kind of thing. Like, it's just like I don't know when I would actually apply this. But I don't know, like the random trajectory in my life, I have actually ended up using it a lot more than I thought.
I love that. I loved chemistry, and for the same reasons you're talking about. I still have a nightmare of Delantin and glucose. So terrible mixture. You see it happen. You're like, whoa, this is terrible. So for all of you who hate chemistry or have a career in nursing, you will definitely, absolutely use it as a nurse. So just in terms of your role as a CNS, what do you think are the most important skills that you need to have to be a CNS?
That is a good question too. So, okay, so well, I think like your hard skills that you need to learn, it's kind of hard soft, would be a project manager. Like I really strongly believe that if you want to be a clinical nurse specialist, that you should take some project management classes. And I think most programs will integrate some sort of like education on like basic quality improvement and performance improvement things like lean, and the different like evidence-based practice processes. Like you learn the Iowa model and the Johns Hopkins model and the STAR model and PDCA and all those kind of things, but you barely kind of get to the tip of the iceberg. And what you really need to do is like dive in deep and really understand like, why is a charter important when you're starting an initiative? Why is it important to write things down? And then how that can make like a huge difference in the beginning, because I do see that happen over and over again with different initiatives, not just at my organization, but at the different organizations that I've worked with, where somebody has like this really wonderful idea and they want to implement this change. So they get a group of people together. Um, and then the question is, and what you learn in project management, was that the right group of people to get together? Did you think about all of your stakeholders and who is going to be doing what and who's going to be responsible for what? Um, and then in those initial meetings, did you write down what your idea was and your initial thoughts? Because over time, and as you'll learn, like those initial ideas can change. What you thought it was going to look like in the beginning may evolve over time and look like something else, or you want to make sure that that initial idea doesn't get lost. So you need to write it down in a charter, including all of that information about your stakeholders and what they're responsible for and how often you're going to meet and things like that, and making that commitment with one another. And that's part of project management. It teaches you to do that. It teaches you about those aspects. And then also the importance of like task lists and how to manage a task list and follow up, and timelines and Gantt charts and things like that seem tedious, but once you learn how to do them and can do them effectively and efficiently, it makes a huge difference in your ability to implement things. Like I have like 4 or 5 I'm helping with, like 4 or 5 different quality improvement and evidence-based practice initiatives on one of my units. And a lot of them, like the different project phases, were starting to overlap. And so I know from my project management experience, I'm like, it would be really helpful for us right now, like a Gantt chart. That would be really helpful. Or like a really nice project dashboard. And then understanding like what elements should go into that project dashboard, and that what like how long these phases should be and things like that, that you learn through your experience as a project manager. I think that has absolutely been invaluable in my ability to help people move things forward and help them realize their project so they don't just stay in the idea phase forever. So that's one of the skills that I think definitely, like, developing your project management skill set is super important for a clinical nurse specialist. The other thing that I was thinking like might be like an absolute asset and what you need as a clinical nurse specialist is more of like a characteristic, but you need to be a lifelong learner. You need to be hungry for knowledge your entire career. You can never get to a point where you're like, okay, I've learned enough and I'm done, like reading journal articles. It doesn't work like that. Like, your part of your job is to be a clinical expert, and to be knowledgeable about your field. So you have to constantly be seeking out new information, be in the journals. And if somebody asks you a question and you don't know, you say, you know what? That is a great question. I have no idea. Let me go look that up, and know your resources and know where to go. And you have to be comfortable with that process, and just constantly challenging yourself with new information. Especially like I feel like where I work, and I'm sure this is true to anybody who works in like a subspecialty, like things are constantly changing. Like if you think about where we were with like bone marrow transplant like 20 years ago is completely different than where we are now, and the innovations and the things that we have been able to accomplish and help people and their survival rates and things like that. Like, it changes so rapidly. Almost every single day there's something new and different that you have to learn about. Like, you have to be committed to that process of like seeking out and like harvesting that knowledge.
I love it. About a lifelong learner, definitely. There's always something new, and I feel like, for me, I have to prioritize the journal articles that I read, and I just literally rip them out and take them with me on the plane, because I can't read all of them. But I love that. What about as a project?
Sorry, like, but like from a project management perspective or like transition planning, I find that, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the videos and the webinars from PMI, the Project Management Institute, because you have to get like your CEUs to maintain your project management certification. Those are super awesome too. Just to, like, if you get like really bored or you're like cleaning in your house and you want to listen to something that's like just a little bit different than your normal podcast, throw on a PMI webinar and learn about, I don't know, like an agile or some other way to make a dashboard or how somebody like solved a problem. Like it's pretty cool. Like that's there too.
Oh, that's great advice. Any other just skills or priorities that are important for a project manager?
For a project manager, um, I that is it. The other thing I think, um, what do you think, Kelly? Like, what do you think would
I
be like the thing that you need to know as a project
I think
manager?
the one part that I would say, and it is a soft skill, is that you have to be humble in the sense that oftentimes you're doing the work and we're doing a lot of the work behind the scenes and we're helping the client, and then the client gets that recognition and is like, here's what I did, and so we're really helping people. So a lot of times we don't get the recognition. So if you're somebody who needs to get recognition, it isn't necessarily going to happen as a consultant. So if you're walking away saying like, I did that, that's not really what our job is. Our job is to make the client successful because they're going to live in that organization and they're going to take that information and own it. So, it really is a mixed bag, because when you start off, like, you're trying to get things checked off on your resume and you want to say like, I did this and I accomplished this and this was my win. But as a consultant, your job is to really make your client successful. So I would say that I've had many people come and say, well, didn't we do that, or wasn't that our process? And it's our process, but I feel like we really did a great job where they're owning it, they're implementing it, and helping their staff to get through this process. So I would say just being humble in that sense and really taking pride that you're helping your clients to do a good job. But I think time management and prioritizing. So I think of the Parkinson's law of, like, if I give you an hour to do something, you're going to take an hour and go, back to your just do it with the writing. So, we said we're going to write a book in a year and we're going to have the first draft done by here. And honestly, the day before all of our deadlines, that's when it was due. And if it would have been done earlier, we would have had it done earlier. So I do think, like, for me, time management and prioritization of, like, well, what are the things that you really need to get done? And then how much time do you have to do it? Because there's never enough time. So I think just being able to manage all of that time. So speaking of time management, you're a mom and a CNS and have a life and like to do things outside of work. So how do you prioritize and manage your time?
It's yeah. So I anytime anybody asks me this, I always feel like I like geek out a little bit because it's planning is my hobby. And I'm really fortunate to find after like the last 2 years of the pandemic, I actually discovered the planner community. So there's like this whole group of people on social media and the all these different platforms that just talk about planning, and there's a lot of mom podcasts out there that are focused on talking about like trying to achieve that balance between work and life. Or really, now that I heard about this, like I read this book called Unapologetically Ambitious. Um, and she talks about making that transition. I'm kind of going around your question a little bit, but I will get to it. And she talks about the transition from work life balance to work life integration. So how do you design your life in such a way where you're not making this like delineation between work and your personal life, but you're really joining it together. So I do that in a couple different ways. So as far as tangible tools that I use that have been helpful, I have my Outlook calendar, which governs my work life and also how I track my time. And I also will put in there, like, if I have a doctor's appointment or if my daughter has like a recital or something, I will put it in there to block off time. And I share my calendar with my colleagues. And so it's not like everyone knows I have a kid. Everyone knows that she has things in the middle of the day. It is not a secret. Everyone knows her name. And so they'll respect my personal time as long as I get everything done. Like, that's fine. And then I also have like rituals that I've established that I do every day, every week, every month, and then annually. And I actually took the time to like write it down in a notebook of like every Friday evening. I work mid shifts on Fridays, which means I work from like 3 to 11 or 2 to 10. And at the end, towards the end of my shift, I will go through my task list for the week, and my calendar for the next week, and say, like, what do I need? What is left over from this previous week that I need to carry over into the next week? What are my priorities going to be? What meetings do I need to prepare for? Do I have to give any presentations or anything like that? And then I look at my Outlook calendar, and then I plug in the different time periods that I'm going to need in order to prepare for those things. And then I also have a paper planner, um, which I love the act of like writing things down and like kind of like drafting what I think my week is going to look like. It's always going to change. But it also allows me to kind of like get a little bit more like creative with it. Um, and so I use my paper planner as like my checklist for every day. And then also to help kind of track some of my like personal life sort of things that to make sure that they don't fall off like I always do. I put in my grocery order, which thank God, one of the silver linings of of the pandemic, which there hasn't been like that many, but one of the things that I'm really happy about is being able to order my groceries online and then just pick it up on my way home. I haven't gone to the grocery store in months. And so that's part of like my weekly rituals is on Fridays I put in my grocery order and then I pick it up, and I actually have a list in my notebook of like my standard grocery items that I need to make sure that I have in the pantry and the refrigerator to make sure we never run out of things, and that we just like, we never skip a beat. And then I with my family, my husband is also a project manager, so it's like match made in heaven, our poor children. We have like routines in the morning that we just stick to, and like everyone has like their role that they play. So we have a morning routine and an evening routine, and weekend routines. And so I think kind of using those different tools, establishing good habits that we can stick to, and that we're like disciplined enough to stick to, have been like really helpful. But like having those honest conversations, like if you have a partner, or even just having honest conversations with yourself about like what's feasible and like when you need to ask for help, has been really important too. like I do a lot of stuff. I have a lot of things on my calendar, and I enjoy them. But there are like certain things that I just don't enjoy. Like I don't like cleaning. I really don't. I do it because like it's a necessity, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and everything needs to be cleaned, and I don't like clutter. So I do it mostly for that. But now that I'm like 8 months pregnant, it's like this whole added layer of complexity. And so I got a housekeeper to help with that. And that takes it off my plate, which has freed up more time to do things that I actually want to do, whether it like be attend a webinar or like take a class or take my daughter to the beach or spend time with my husband or something like that. So I'm very fortunate to be able just to make that decision. But I look at that in my priorities. And that is another thing that I do like in January is I'll actually write down my priorities for the year. Where are the 3 areas that I want to focus on, and come up with like my own goals. And then that way I can like use those things to guide what I do every month and every day. And I know that's like a lot of people might find that kind of intense, but I do give myself like a fair amount of grace. Like if I'm kind of like make it a couple months and I'm like not really in love with a certain goal, I'll just let it go and I'll move on. That's fine. But I think my advice to people who are trying to figure out like how to manage their life maybe a little bit more effectively is like just find a process that works for you. Maybe you have to find
Mm-hmm.
like two or three different tools that you think might work for you and try them out. And if they don't work, then that's fine. Then try something different. But even just taking that initial step to try to put in a system is a big deal, and you should give yourself like grace and an applause for that. But yeah, that's just like a little tidbit about how I've found to be most successful, and I just keep my mind open and I take people's advice and ask for help, and yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I do most of those things that you talked about. And I do love that your comment about integrating your life, because there aren't clean lines. And particularly as a nurse, like, you're some people are on call, and sometimes, people are asking for extra shifts, like right now, always. But, finding things that you really love to do. So people are asking me, how could you do that on the weekend? I'm like, it makes me happy. Like, there's some projects that we work on that, we do a lot of stuff for free, just because it's like, this is a great, this is going to be helpful, or we can create a great tool out of this. And you get to see the end input, the end output of, all of that time that you spent just, focusing. And I don't see it as this was my personal time wasted on work. So I think it's a great, great, great comment. Um, and
Yeah.
I love your advice too about find something that works for you, because when Stephen Covey came out with his 7 habits, like, I followed it for the longest time, and I was miserable because I was like, this is a dumb habit. And at some point I was just like, okay, I'm keeping this, this, and this. And I created my own little process, which is very similar to yours. So
Yeah, and then like I think we talked about before like the passion planner. Like
mm,
I initially when I started using the passion planner, I was like really excited about it because I'm like, okay, this is awesome. Like I like how big the pages are and there's space for every day and every week, and I it also integrates like your personal goals and time for reflection and journaling. Like this is great. And then like 6 months into it, I'm like, no, this isn't so great. This isn't what I need. I would rather go back to my other like thicker, simpler planner, and that's really I just need like a checklist kind of thing. And so it's just like sometimes like I like passion planner projects. I love everything that Angela Trinidad does, but it just didn't work for me. Um
oh,
and so I go back to my Erin Condren products and things like that, and I like those better. But yeah, and then like the other thing with like which I had to learn, I think like over like through my 20s and kind of like break that. I don't know, like I think in the beginning of my career I always thought like what it meant to be like a successful businesswoman is like you just like plow forward and everything is business and you're just like ultra focused and determined about like what that next step was. Like once you achieve something, like what's the next step? And it took me a long
mm,
time to kind of like break that cycle in my head, um and learn how to be like comfortable with like never comfortable with complacency, but like setting more realistic expectations for myself and learning that like taking like for example in December we had like a skills day for our new grads, and in the middle of that skills day was my daughter's like little winter recital. It was like she's 3, and so it's only like 10 minutes, and it was on Facebook Live because it's a pandemic and we're not allowed to go, so they just like recorded it and streamed it. And so in the middle of skills day, I stopped and said, "Excuse me for a second." Like we ended up having like a break at that time anyway, so it worked out perfectly. And we like me and some of my colleagues sat and we watched her little recital on, on
oh,
Facebook Live. And I think before like I would have felt like, "Oh, that's not like appropriate to break up the middle of like a business day like that." But now I'm like, "No, it's like we're human, it's
mm-hmm.
authentic, and it would have made me really sad to miss it." So I think I've definitely learned to give myself a lot more grace, like now that I'm in my 30s and
I,
had a little bit of
I,
life experience under my belt. And so yeah,
I
every
love it.
every day is a
Very,
work
very
in progress.
good for you. Very proud of you. I love it. Final question. So if you could provide advice to your either your younger you or somebody who's starting out in either a CNS role or transition role or just general career advice, what would you say to them?
I would say, I think it's like I have different variations of basically the same concept, but like, don't take yourself too seriously and don't try to like change everything all at once. Like I definitely still struggle with that now, where it's like I still have that mentality and impatience, um that like if I see something that's wrong, I want to change it right now, I want to do it right now, like I don't want to wait for anybody, I'm going to plow right through, and just get it done regardless of what anybody says. But that's not the way to do it. That's a very unhealthy approach, I have learned, at least for me in my experience. And so I've learned to pick my battles more conscientiously, and be more intentional about the things that I dedicate my time to. So like for example, like in nursing, especially if you're in like performance improvement or nursing education, there are like a million things that you can change every single day. Like there's always something that needs to be done. There's always fundamentals that need to be, like nursing fundamentals that need to be discussed and addressed and things like that. Um, and it turns into, and one of my colleagues was really, I really like this description, like a mountain. Like it's basically like you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're constantly trying to climb Everest. Um, but maybe instead of like pushing yourself to do that, you could just pick a hill and pick like a certain elevation, and just do that for a little while, and just little by little take like chip away at it, small bites, and then eventually you'll climb Everest, but you're not going to do it all at once. So just, I hope that makes sense, but it's like, you know, picking your battles and just taking things like a little bit at a time. Don't go in guns blazing, like just calm down. And you will eventually climb that mountain, but it takes time.
I love it. Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your morning with me. And what did you think about the tea?
I like it. It kind of smells like Christmas, which is fun. You know,
I did.
like bringing a little bit of Christmas into your day when it's not Christmas.
Yeah, apple cider, yummy. Okay, we have some rapid fire for you. So are you ready for
Oh my
that?
goodness. Sure.
Okay. Favorite city in the world?
Oh my God, I can't be rapid with this. I Oh my God, what's my favorite city?
You could go somewhere
I,
tomorrow. Where would it be? If you could like time travel and go, oh, I'm gonna go here.
I know this was going to be really random, but the first place that came to mind was like Portland, Oregon. Because like my husband and we had a great time there. And I mean, if I wasn't pregnant, I would like, they had breweries, we can go hiking, like we like the vibe. Like I love it there.
There you go.
And I have been around the world, and I don't know. That's the first place that came to mind.
I was thinking you're gonna say Paris or something like that, but okay. But
Oh,
you
I
know,
know, right?
keep
I'm a
Oregon
simple
weird or
girl.
keep Portland weird. I think that's their motto, right? Okay, here's an easier one. Sports, watching or participating?
Sports?
Sports.
Oh, participating. I'm an incredibly competitive person.
Yes, goalie girl. Introvert or extrovert?
I'm a I'm an extroverted introvert, but baseline I'm an introvert.
So I think we all are.
Yeah.
Favorite day of the week?
Saturdays, because I don't have to work on Saturdays.
Love it. How about your favorite comfort food?
Cheeseburgers.
That sounds good right now. How about your
With like
favorite?
bacon and avocado and grilled onions, like a real big cheeseburger. Like it, yes.
Yummy. Favorite TV show?
That I could like watch over and over again. So like, don't judge me, people. I love the Golden Girls. It was like it got canceled before I was even born. But I just love that show.
And which Golden Girl do you relate the most to?
You know, it's funny. It's not that I relate to any of them. It's just they remind me of grandma. My grandma and her mom and her sisters are tias, and they're it's just like the way that they interact with each other just reminds me of how we grew up. And so I think that's why I like it, because it's hilarious. It's like a caricature of them.
That's so funny. I love it. Say a word in Spanish.
What? Say a word in Spanish?
Yes.
Hola.
So you were a vegetarian at one point in your life, as I recall. So do you think it's wrong for a vegetarian to eat animal crackers?
It's a very fine line. Depends on what type of vegetarian you are, but I think that might be a socially acceptable transgression.
Okay, final question. Favorite karaoke song?
Oh, Come Together by the Beatles.
Can you give us a little sample?
No.
Oh, come on.
You give us a little sample.
It's not my favorite song. And as you know, I cannot sing, and you have a fabulous voice. So, all right. Well, thank you, Erica, for joining us today. And if our listeners want to connect with you, can you share your LinkedIn information?
Yeah, you could just look me up on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Erica Dickey, ERICADICKEY. Or you can contact me via email. It's edickey, EDICKEY @coh.org. And I'd be happy to connect with you.
Well, thank you
thank
very
you. This
much.
has been fun.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of our Transition Tea. And on our next episode, we're going to be joined by another healthcare leader to chat over a couple of best practices, pouring over new insights, and steeping our next blend of transition and activation expertise. So thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more conversations like this one, please subscribe to our Transition Tea wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want the live videos of our recordings, you can go ahead and follow us on our Yellow Brick YouTube channel. So cheers. Till next time. Thank you.